Hi there, welcome to Floating in Dreams. This is going to be a declutter regrets video all about my Anastasia palettes. Welcome to everybody watching today. Thank you so very much for joining me. So I've been doing this series for quite some time where I talk about things I've decluttered in my makeup collection. We're still sort of strong with the palette game, but the plan is to, in 2025, just take some old decluttering videos and go over those and like talk about whether I regret getting rid of some things, and then also go beyond what I've decluttered palette-wise and to also talk about blushes and highlighters and those kind of things. Today we have a special edition because today is dedicated to my Anastasia Beverly Hills eyeshadow palette collection. So this is a video I did back in, can I find it? Let me look it up here. I did it 3 years ago, it says. March 2021. So that's when I filmed it. So right before I started decluttering a lot of the like palette families I had in my collection, I did do this like monthly video where I would select a brand where I had quite a few palettes by them, and then I would do a video with it. And I think this is the moment, right? Like I filmed this right before I started decluttering some of my ABH palettes. And I have now, I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I only have 5 of these left from what's going on in the video. And as I will be explaining shortly, 2 of those palettes are a conglomeration of like 6 Anastasia palettes, or maybe even 8. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I still have 3 in the original packaging that I haven't messed with. 2 of them I've gotten rid of completely. And then for the other 6 palettes, I've actually repurposed 2 of the palette packaging, and I've just selected my shades from like my favorite shades from the other 6 palettes, and I've made 2 new palettes with it. I made a cool tone palette and a warm tone palette. Those have been shown on my channel for sure, and I do have a video up where I reorganized my ABH palettes, so make sure to link that in the description box down below if you want to see how I did that and how I went from 6 ABH palettes to just 2. Because with ABH, as much hype as this brand used to get, of course there's one palette missing here, the Nouveau, that wasn't out yet, and that's one that I've added since filming this video. But ABH was a brand that was, of course, so hyped up, especially with the Modern Renaissance when that was released, the original Makeup by Mario palette when that was out. So I definitely think that when it comes to the ABH palettes, these were cult favorites. These were palettes that a lot of people liked. And for me, it just was never my favorite formula. As much hype as these got, I thought they were very overrated. And that very much had to do with my perspective living in the Netherlands. The original Modern Renaissance, it took me about a year to get my hands on it because the brand was only available in the US for a very, very long time. And then by the time I could get my hands on ABH when it was launched over here in Europe, we got the same products, but at a huge, huge markup. So the original Modern Renaissance, when it launched, was $42 or maybe $44 on Sephora, which at that time was like 39 euros. We got that palette for $56.95, which was as much as an Urban Decay Naked palette, which were also all the rage still when that launched. So for me, I like the formula of the Urban Decay ones just so much better. It's a little bit more densely packed. The ABH formula is a little bit looser, and that was just something that I didn't love. It had a lot of kick up. People were hitting pan on it for that reason incredibly quickly. And I just felt, you know, with the ABH palettes, like I've seen a lot of people pan this. I don't think it takes that much effort because it feels very wasteful every single time you stuck a brush in, at least to me. So for me, it just never was my favorite formula, which is why I had no issues pulling this palette family apart, taking my shades out that were my best shades, my favorite shades from 6 of these palettes, and keep the shades I truly loved, because with a lot of my ABH palettes, I felt the palette itself as a whole didn't make sense for me, but there were definitely shades in each palette that I loved. So let me talk about each one of these. I'm going to skip the intro And the first palette I'm talking about here is the Carli Bybel. I dislike the packaging. This is why I didn't pick it up initially, but then I found a really good deal with the large Norvina palette that was lying right beside it. That's the only reason why I picked it up. It was a huge Black Friday deal at the time, and I essentially got this palette for free, which I thought was good. What made me fall in love with it, though, as I was trying it, was that the top row has cool tone neutrals, and the bottom row has the warmer tone neutrals. And that has been the thing I have loved in this palette so much. It has a couple of really pretty shimmers, some really good mattes, and it's just an incredibly versatile little palette because of that mixture of the cool tones with the warm tones. There are definitely shades in here I don't reach for, but with this, compared to some of the other ABH palettes we'll look at in a second, I just felt that a lot of these shades work for me and I can use them, and it will come to a very pretty look. Even that peach and the red, which are not usually shades I reach for, make for a really pretty juxtaposition with some of the cooler tones in the top half that I just feel very creative when I use this, and it's definitely a color story that didn't look like it was going to work for me, but this was a palette that proved me wrong, and I just enjoyed it so much better. Then the next palette is the Mini Norvina. This was the Cherry number 3, and this was such a letdown when I got it. This is a palette I kept around solely for the packaging for a little while, and also to moan a little bit about my experience using this. This looked really pretty on a lot of the websites where it was promoted, but then when I got it home, the shimmers were really chunky. They didn't pick up. They were more like pressed glitters than anything else. And in theory, this could work because you could blend that light blue with some of the pinks and the reds to create purple tones quite easily. But I felt so duped by this when I got it in because the shimmers weren't what I had expected. The mattes in this weren't all that great, and a couple of the mattes in this palette actually looked identical once used on the face. So it was only a 9-pan, but it just wasn't a great palette for me. Ooh, the imaging here went very blurry. Let me see if we can get a better shot of this. But this is just, it was just such a terrible palette, such a great letdown, and it just made me not love the Norvina palettes at all. It looks so special and interesting. That's why I got it. But once I got it in, I just felt it was one of the most unworkable eyeshadow palettes I ever got my hands on. So for me, this didn't work. I know a lot of people did love it, but for me, it was a big no-no. And then we're moving on to the big Norvina. I believe this was number 4, if I'm not mistaken. And this is one that I got, and then it was like Black Friday, it was 25% off. And then if you got if you paid over a certain amount, you got the Carli Bybel for free, or it was like one of those deals. And this was a massive palette. This is very much sort of pre-Blend Bunny and palettes like that. And I definitely think a lot of indie brands have started like taking inspiration from this, and they now just do it a lot better than ABH ever did. I bought this because it was very much like a pinky purple sort of palette, and it had really pretty interesting shades in. But when I was using it, I just felt that this palette, like the Norvina Mini, didn't have the shades I wanted. A lot of the shimmers, there were only 4 of them anyways in this palette, maybe 5. Like most of them were pressed glitters and had this really chunky texture that was very difficult to pick up and get it to stick to your eyes. And then everything was a matte that was incredibly bland and not a lot of interest at all. It also looked really cool toned in a lot of the pictures online, but this is one of the palettes where I knew that that really taught me that online imaging is very deceiving, because a lot of brands will, of course, edit their images, and this looked so much more cool toned than it actually was when I started using it on my pale skin. It has a lot of orange, it has a lot of warmer pinks in, and it was very deceiving. The shades I ended up using were only 4 or 5 shades, and for a 25-pan eyeshadow palette, it just wasn't worth it for me, and this was a really quick declutter for me. So yeah, so far of the palettes I've gotten rid of or kept, I don't feel any regrets. We are now moving on to the palettes that had been in my collection for the longest time at this point, and we are going to be talking about the Soft Glam next. And the Soft Glam was a palette that till this day is still in my makeup collection, as is. This is another one of those palettes that I bought at the height of the warm tone craze that we had a couple of years ago, which, if you ask me, I wasn't a huge fan of for such a long time, but as far as keeping some warm tone palettes in my collection, this is one that has made it through rounds of declutter since then, and it's just one that I still love. The shade Sultry that I feel was the instigator for the Sultry palette, that's also coming up later in this video, is one of my favorite shades in this entire palette. It has some really pretty, almost rosy pink tones in that I love. It has one of my favorite crease shades from my collection, which is Dusty Rose. And I'm covering up the orangey tones with my thumb at some point in this video because those are the two shades I don't reach for. And for an ABH palette where there are like two shades I don't really reach for, but I do like the rest, that was quite a feat for me. So the Soft Glam has been my pick for having a warm tone palette still in my collection till this day. And if I want that glam sort of almost 2016 reminiscent warm toned look, this is the palette I go for, and it's been great in my collection for that. And then we're doing the Sultry palette here. This palette was promoted as being cool tone by the brand when this was launched. It was limited edition, but it was brought back a couple of times. I believe the Soft Glam and the Sultry are now available as 9 pans, if I'm not mistaken. And this is definitely cooler tone than anything that ABH had done at this point. On me, it all pulled incredibly warm toned. And what I didn't get, what I was really missing in this palette, was a good enough crease shade for me. The coral was a complete miss. If that had been a cooler tone brown, like taupey number for the crease, I would have liked it so much better. There were some really good shades in here. I think Cinder, Teak, Rose Quartz, and Cyborg, and also Dystopian, because I did like that matte dark brown, are all in the 2 palettes I still have curated from the palettes when I decluttered these. Twig may be in there as well. But a lot of these shades were either too light, they were either too warm toned. Essentially, this had 3 gold, like a lot of the shimmers were gold or bronze. So Steampunk, Ember, Cinder, and Teak are all golds, browns, bronzes with this warmer undertone. So for me, it was definitely also in the shimmer department that I didn't get the cool tonedness that I wanted. The only true cool tone you get is Cyborg and Rose Quartz a little bit, but that's even like a rose gold kind of shade. So again, quite a bit of warmth there. So this just wasn't as cool toned as I wanted it to be, but I love the packaging. So I believe the cool toned one, no, the warm toned palette I made with my ABH shades is still in the Sultry packaging because I just think this really nice sparkly packaging is so much fun. I did stick some of my pans in the wrong way when I reorganized it, but they're glued in and I don't want to go through taking them out. So some of them are a little bit fragile from like having pressure from the sides because these look like they're square pans, but they're ever so slightly rectangular. So if you tilt them just a little bit the wrong way, they do not exactly fit in. So some of them are a little snug. Our next palette here is the Norvina, and this one was one for the longest time that I loved the most. These were exactly the kind of shades I loved, and also from this one I have kept quite a few. But over time, as I was using it time and time again, quite a few shades that didn't quite work for me. I think Celestial and, I can't read the names here at the minute, but Celestial and Soul are definitely in my cool tone palette. I think Volatile is as well, because those were 3 of my favorite shades. And I think Drama may be in there and Wild Child. But the rest of it, if this palette didn't have those really warm tones in the bottom right corner, I would have liked it so much better. So Eccentric and Passion are 2 shades I never reached for. I felt they were very different from the rest of the palette, so I just didn't go for it. There were a couple of really nice warmer tone shimmers in here. I think the Rose Gold shade is one I kept around as well, possibly Love, but a lot of it was warmer toned, and so I just decided to keep the shades around that I thought were truly special and different from this. So I think it was like Soul, Wild Child, Celestial, and Volatile. Those I know for sure I still have, but the rest of this palette I was a bit, not really my favorite at all. And I just kept, like, whenever I was using this palette again, I would always go for the same shades. So that taught me that this wasn't a right palette for me. And I remember when I was doing my declutter that year, when I decided I was going to reorganize my ABH palettes, this one was initially not on the chopping block, but I kind of pulled it in together with the Riviera that's still coming up, that it made sense to also have those in, because else I wouldn't have enough shades to fill up the new palettes with. So that's why this one ended up being decluttered, and I don't regret it at all, and I still have the shades I love. And then we're talking about the Modern Renaissance. Of course, this is the iconic palette from the brand, and everybody loved those light orangey shades on the left-hand side of this palette. If I've seen people hitting pan, it's the 6 shades to the left of the palette that I see most people hitting pan on, and Buon Fresco. My favorite shades, Buon Fresco, Red Ochre, Venetian Red, and Love Letter. So essentially the berries, the reds, Antique Bronze, and Cypress Umber. Cypress Umber is also in the soft glam, so I didn't feel like keeping that. And I also feel Tempera. Tempera is also... Why is this video so blurry? The camera I had at the time had a hard time that day filming this video. But yeah, Tempera was also in the soft glam, so 2 of these shades I still have anyways. Vermeer and was also like one of my favorite shimmers, so this had a couple of really pretty shades in, but again, a palette I used in the fall time to reach for the berry tones and nothing much else. So this palette was not that successful for me, and the shades that everybody else loved for it were shades that didn't work on me. Then we're moving on to one of my favorites, the Subculture. This is one of my favorite fall palettes. This color story eats, breathes, sleeps fall, and I cannot repeat it enough. I love using this in the fall time with multi-chromes. Jewel tone multi-chromes with this palette is what keeps it going in my collection. There were a lot of dupes around. Of course, it had a lot of controversy with the quality not being the same for a lot of people, and I love this because it's so incredibly pigmented. The shade I'm swatching here is Axis, which is this really deep, intense teal shade. It's incredibly difficult to work with because it can get a little bit patchy because it's so pigmented, but this has everything. It just doesn't have a lot of shimmers. So there were only 3 shimmers in this, Cube, Electric, and Adorn, and I felt that the shimmers didn't really go with the mattes. So I mainly use this for the mattes, set up the look, use a multi-chrome shimmer all over the lid, and I'm out the door in seconds. You can go really warm toned and spicy with this if you pull in some of the browns and like the mustardy yellow shades it has. You can go more cool tones if you stick to that, what's it called? Mercury shade, and Rowdy, which is the deep purple that's in here, or you can go more teal with the greens and the teals it has. It's excellent, and I love mine. I think really shortly, we're talking about the Prism here for a second. There were only 2 shades I like from this, maybe 3, which is Dimension all the way to the left, Throne in the middle, and Lore all the way on the end there as well. And maybe Osiris I've kept around as well, because that's a purple that's really nice. But this was just not my palette. It felt like a very disjointed color story. And I believe this was launched as a limited edition palette for Christmas to be like the shimmer palette to go with the Subculture. I'm not sure if I remember that correctly because I might be wrong about that, but it just had so many random shades that I couldn't deal with, so I kept the 3 to 4 shades that I loved, decluttered the rest, and I don't regret it one bit because that dark green was the star of the show with this palette. Riviera is up next. This is a really fun spring summer kind of palette with some neons in. I think I've kept the bright pink and the bright purple that are in here, and I'm pretty sure that I've kept Seaside and Mediterranean as well, 2 of the shimmers in the top. They're these really pretty bluey gray shimmers. They were great for the cool tone palette, but again, I've decluttered everything else. This is just not my palette. It, again, had a lot of peach tones. The mattes and the shimmers didn't really go together for me. There were only 3 or 4 shades that I loved and adored from the Riviera, so that's why I ended up just keeping the shades that I loved, and I really don't regret getting rid of the Riviera palette because as lovely as this color story is, as unique it was for the brand, there were just so many warm shades in that I know I wasn't going to reach for it. And finally, we're moving on to the Jackie Aina, and this was such a good palette from the brand. I think it's the best ABH palette that ever came to market that I personally tried. Really, really good formula. It was quite dark for my colors, for my color skin tone. I think this was great because, of course, Jackie Aina having a much deeper skin tone than me, that's the demographic she was aiming this at. But with a light hand, I could definitely make it work. But this was also too warm toned for me. So I know I kept Big Wig and also Shookington. Those were my two favorite purples that ABH has ever done. And also Lithuation, which is the taupe brown on the right. So, so stunning. And I think I've kept Sponsored and possibly, I can't read it, Credit, like the dark brown. I think I kept Dystopian over Credit at the end. But I think the two purples, Lithuation and Sponsored, those were the four shades that truly stood out to me in this palette. I may have used some of the pinks at some point. It was stunning, beautiful quality, but not quite right for me. So I kept the shades I like. And to be quite fair, I still have the packaging because I put the Cool Tone palette in my Jackie Aina packaging. So I still have that memento of what this palette actually was. But there were just too many shades that were too warm, too deep, and therefore it didn't quite work for me. But the shades I love, and having all those shades together, I did use the palettes after I created the new color stories, and going back to it and using those color stories confirmed for me that the palettes I now have are my perfect ABH palettes. So for me, it was a win to be putting these palettes together, having only 2 palettes instead of 6, having my favorite shades in, and then also having the palettes, like having a warm tone palette and a cooler tone palette with all the shades I love has been a game changer for me. So I know a lot of people dislike when creators reorganize their palettes. They want them to have them in pristine condition, and it's just not how I live my life. I don't want to keep things around just to have a perfect collection that looks aesthetically pleasing on the internet. That's not how I live my life. My makeup needs to work for me, just like I feel my wardrobe needs to work for me, and I don't care what everybody else thinks, you could say. So I definitely think that this just works for me, and I've been really happy with the decision to declutter those 6 palettes and only keep the shades that I truly love. And the 2 palettes that I did truly get rid of, I'm really not missing in my collection. So with ABH, all of my decisions have been really solid. I think that's been the conclusion so far. I definitely do not declutter things until I feel ready to declutter things. So there's definitely that goes into it as well. But yeah, I did really enjoy my ABH palettes as long as they lasted, and I still have everything that I love from the brand. I'm in no mood to declutter any more of them, and I'm also not really in the mood of buying any more ABH because I feel their releases have just gotten a little samey. The Nouveau was really exciting and new when that was launched, but then they did some other palettes in similar style packaging since then, and those look like different renditions of the Nouveau. So I was hoping that ABH would find their streak again with having really good palettes, but they haven't really, so I didn't buy any of those. So there's that. But yeah, I think ABH is a great brand. They do some lovely things, and I still have a lot of the eyeshadow palettes because I love them. I just do. So let me know in a comment down below how you feel about ABH. Have you decluttered some of yours over time? Or maybe you are one of those people who'd actually panned their modern renaissance. I would love to know. So let me know in a comment down below about all your thoughts. And then I would like to thank you so very much for joining me here today. Thumbs up this video if you liked it. Subscribe to the channel, and I hope you'd like to come back for more because I do post 4 times a week on this channel. See you next time. Bye-bye.